We are going to see a couple of updates in CLO that are very interesting, especially for intimate designers. And these first two, the soft body avatars and the elastic properties, were actually from the previous version of CLO, but the soft body avatars didn't work as well as they should. So I waited until they were more usable to create a video and explain them. First, the soft body avatar. So we have our avatar here. This works with the standard CLO avatars and with the avatars that you can import from other softwares, though I haven't tried that yet. I just tried with the usual CLO avatars. And now we have a checkbox here that says soft body simulation. And if we check it, we have this slider with the body stiffness. This, I wish it was better explained. What is the actual body stiffness of a person? Like, is this too low? Is this too much? I usually have it in around 7,000 or 8,000 because that was the default, and I think it works well, but I would like to know a bit more of how they have calculated that and the difference of this soft body avatar compared to the ones in the previous version was that previously all the body was soft, so everything was soft as if the avatar didn't have bones, so the straps would dig into the shoulders to the point that they will be into the shoulders, that the part of the bra would be inside of the avatar. So I think they have improved that, so the shoulders actually have a bit more stiffness to them. We can still see if the straps are digging in, but they are a bit more realistic in a way. And also now you can use the soft body simulation feature for animation, though what I was expecting to see is that if I put a model walking, I would see the body actually being soft. So, you know, when you walk, the breast would move or the hips or something like that, but they don't, at least not that I have noticed. What you can see is that if the garment is digging in, that will show on the animation. But for now, that's all. Before I activate the soft body simulation, I also want to talk about the new elastic fabric feature. So previously, if this was supposed to be an elastic trim, like a just straight elastic piece, and this too, they wouldn't behave exactly like that, because what you have to do to emulate the elastic capabilities are to select each of these lines and turn the elastic on, and the default setting was 1080. And I didn't pay much attention to that. For example, for the leg line of the panty, I used 1080 more or less always because it didn't appear to make much of a difference. Maybe I would reduce it a bit, but before the soft body avatars, it didn't have a big role to play. This, what it's doing is that it's applying elastic to just the edge of the pieces. So in this case, this is going up because there's elastic also on the neckline, and this fabric is behaving like fabric, not like an elastic trim that is pretty much solid and doesn't go up in this way. You could, of course, create a new fabric and make it sturdier, reduce the weft, stretch, and all these things, but that's a lot. So if I were to simulate this now and I have the soft body simulation apply, this is what would happen. So the straps are digging into the shoulders a lot, the waistband is digging into the body also a lot, especially in these two lines, and the panty itself is creating a lot of bulges, and it's not looking great. So if I go back to these elastics, the panty elastics, what I could do is to reduce the elastic strength and ratio. So instead of being 10, I would use 2, and the ratio I would use 90. And this is actually much closer to what I would use in real life. Like, I wouldn't attach an elastic to a panty leg line that was too tight. I would prefer to reduce 10% at the maximum, usually, depending on the fabric, depending on the design, but usually I wouldn't apply more than 10% stretch reduction to that elastic. So this is actually closer to what would happen in real life. I could remove this elastic actually if I'm going to apply it to this piece. So I'm going to uncheck that, and this one too, and I'm going to select also the bralette and say 92 here and 90 here. Then I'm going to delete all this elastic for the waistband and for the straps, because now CLO has a new fabric feature. So if we go, I'm going to add a new fabric. I'm going to call it elastic, and I'm going to give it a different color so I can see easier to which pieces I'm applying that. And here on the fabric properties, instead of fabric, I'm going to choose elastic. And the preset is going to be, we can choose knitted or woven. I'm going to choose woven because it has more stability. So I think it's better for the straps and for the underband and the waistband. So I'm going to apply to this, 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 and this. And now I'm going to simulate again. And we can see that the result is much better than before. The elastic is actually behaving like an elastic waistband. This is a bit too tight, so we might need to solve that to add a bit of length to this piece maybe. We can see how the garments would look on the body in a much more realistic way, because obviously the more realistic our fabric properties are, the more realistic the result that we see in CLO will be. So right now I think the bralette actually looks quite good, and for the panty I would need to add a bit of length to that waistband, so I can actually assess the fit and make informed decisions about that instead of just guessing that it's too tight or not tight enough. So with the new CLO version, the 7.3, there are also some features aside from the soft body avatars that I think are interesting for us. The first one of them, and the one that shows more promise, even though I think it's not quite there yet, is the link editing. So imagine that we want to modify this size seam and we want to bring it downwards maybe 2 centimeters, and now we have to modify this one again 2 centimeters. But with the new feature, the link editing, what it's supposed to do is that if I link these two lines and modify one of them, the other one will be modified automatically. So let's see how it works. In theory, you can select one of the lines with the Edit Pattern tool, right-click and say Link Lines, and then you select the one that you want to link, so this one. And now if you move one of these points, the other one moves accordingly. The problem is that it doesn't work very well with curves, as you can see. This shape is very strange. If I undo that and I try in the other side, I see that this curve looks okay, but this one is not. So it's not a big deal. Maybe I could go to my edit curve point and modify this. And now the good thing is that I know that these two lines are the same, but I'm not sure if it's actually saving me a lot of time when I could do just what I always do, like add 1 centimeter and then 1 centimeter to the other. It's basically the same amount of steps, because then I would need to modify this curve. So this is one thing that is okay but has some work to do, and also it's very difficult to undo. If I right click on the line, I don't have the option to unlink those lines. I think this is a bug and this will likely be fixed in the new version or in the new update. A way to do that, a way to do the link editing and then undo it in an easier way, is to do that through the Edit Sewing tool. So if two lines have a sewing relationship like these ones, I can click on that, right click, link line, and if I want to unlink them, I can also right click, and here I do have the option to unlink the lines. It would be very helpful to, for example, for these pieces, this is the waistband, and it would be very nice to have this line linked to these two lines. So if I want to make the waistband larger by 3 centimeters, I could have this also enlarged by the same amount. The problem is that it doesn't happen. So if I link these two and I link these two, and now I go to the Edit Pattern tool, and move this piece. First I get an error message that my points are too close together. That might be a problem from my pattern. This may not happen always, though I've seen that it happens with quite an alarming consistency. But what I can see that I also don't like is that here I can see that this point is moving. So I have moved this, I don't know, maybe 2-3 centimeters. This one is moving roughly half of that distance. That is good, but on the back the point is not moving on the right direction. So instead of being larger, it's being made smaller. And I guess this has to do with the way that CLO computes all these movements, that instead of taking the total length of the line, it's calculating from the movement of the point. So if the point moves from left to right, the points that are linked to it also will move from left to right. So not great. It needs a bit of work. I'm sure they will fix that, but right now I don't see a way to use that actually adds something to my workflow. And one final problem with this tool is that, for example, if I want to link these two lines together, so that when I move the width of the crotch, maybe I want to make this larger, I want the panty to be more covering, I cannot do precise measurements. So usually what I do instead of eyeballing is to right click and input here. For example, I want to add 0.6. So this one has moved, this one hasn't. And they say that in the video they made about the new features, they say that it doesn't work with the precise editing because this tool works by proportions, by calculating proportions. So it cannot apparently work with specific measurements. 99% of the time I edit patterns with the precise moving distance tool. I almost never eyeball things, especially when working with lingerie, with underwear, that these patterns are so small that even a couple of millimeters can have a difference. So I do hope they change this feature and make it better, because I believe it has a lot of potential. It will make my work faster and easier, but right now it's not there. However, it can work for some cases. So for example, if I'm trying to match patterns that don't have a lot of curves, so for example, I can do a rectangle here and imagine that I want to attach it to the waistband for some reason. I can link this line to this line and the top line to the top line if it wants to. Now, because this has direction, it's the same as the Suen relationship. So now I could move this line and this one moves accordingly. And there are some cases when that's good and that's useful. Another case where it could be useful is if I wanted, for example, to make a pocket. Though I don't know if I would want to make a pocket on a panty, but maybe I do, I don't know. I can trace an internal shape here, my pocket, and now I can do with the tracing tool, right click and trace as pattern with link. So right now I have here my pocket, and if I want to make it larger, my internal shape also becomes larger. So that's useful, that has the potential to be useful. So this tool is not completely useless, I think it's very interesting, but I also think it needs a lot of work. So another new thing in CLO 7.3 is a new feed map. And the feed maps can be found here. We have the stress map, the strain map, the feed map, and the pressure map. This one is the new one. And this one is supposed to measure the pressure that the garment is putting on the avatar. So if we turn it on, we can see that the waistband, for example, the waistband and the band of the bralette are putting more pressure than the rest of the garment, which makes sense, and also the straps, which makes sense because those are the ones that are made of elastic and they are meant to be tighter around the body and they are actually smaller than the body. The thing that I'm not completely sold of these feed maps, I think CLO isn't doing a great job at explaining exactly what they are and what they do compared to a real body, because this pressure, how does it feel? Is it too uncomfortable to wear? What do these measurements or these numbers mean in the real world? So how do I know this is too tight for a person? And also, are they taking into account the stretch and the softness of my fabric? Because I'm not sure if they are, and I would like to know to see if it's actually a good tool to use, not to replace fitting on a person, obviously, but to have a better idea. And that's what I think of basically all the fit maps that are now in CLO. Like, what is the baseline, what is the benchmark that we have to compare this against? So I think if they end up explaining this a bit better, or giving us some guidelines, or giving us some more information about how to use it on a real example, on a real world example, I think this has, again, a lot of potential. But right now I find it not as useful as it could be. And because the rest of the fit maps have more or less the same problem, like this one, the fit map is supposed to indicate that there are some parts of the garment that are too tight for a person to wear, but this garment is supposed to be tight around the body. So is it actually too tight, or is it just tighter than a normal garment, like a t-shirt? So these are good in terms of having an idea of what's happening with your fabric, but maybe they could be improved, or at least the communication with the users could be improved, so that we had a better understanding of how all these properties, how they interact with the fabrics that we are using, with the elastics that we are using, and how can we compare that to what's happening on a body, on a real body, on an actual person in the real world. So that's my take on this. And I do hope CLO ends up explaining all of this a bit better, maybe making a video, making a real life versus CLO3D comparison, something like that. That would be very interesting to do, actually. But right now, this is what we have, and these tools are good to have an idea, but maybe not as accurate as I would like them to be for fitting. A feature that is actually very useful and very helpful, and I think I'm going to use it a lot, is the match measurement capability. So right now, imagine that I have altered my panty, the back of my panty. I want it to be less covering on the side, and now I have to check 8.97 and see how much should I alter this other side. But what I can do is select this line, shift select this line, right click, and say match up and match measurement. And now I can decide if I want to match the short measurement or the long measurement, and if I want that extra material that I'm adding, if I want to add it from the start, from the centers, so it kind of balances the seam, or from the end, so it goes upwards. And in this case, I'm going to match the short, and I want it to be from the start, so I want it to be upwards. And here I can also see what is the new measurement. So this thing, I think, is way more useful than the link editing that we saw before. And I think it's actually a step forward for us pattern makers. I think this is actually super useful. It does what it needs to do. It doesn't have, that I know of, any strange bug where it doesn't work. I think this is what I was waiting for in terms of new features for CLO, and I think they did it, and I think this is amazing.